Jim, you are up.
All right. Can y'all hear me?
Sure can.
Excellent. Well, appreciate the opportunity to present a couple of presentations here for you. The first one is going to be waterproofing for exterior balconies and decks for tile and stone. My name is Jim Karen, and I'm the Florida representative for Protector-Wrap, which is a 73-year-old waterproofing company out of Denver, Colorado. And they have been making waterproof membranes for over 70 years. But uniquely, about 25 years ago, they got into the world of the flooring with their same products. And so that's how we are going to be giving a couple of classes here today on the flooring side. This one being waterproofing for exterior balconies and decks for tile and stone. All right. Hold on just a second. It's not flipping. Okay, there we go. I guess I can skip through this, but this is the standard AIA disclaimer. And all we ask is that you don't really ask specific questions about certain types of products and services, but since you're not going to be asking me questions, we'll skip that too. All right, today's outline, it's going to be simple, that we're going to go over what we call the recommended method to success, and that would be success for the obviously waterproofing underneath tile and stone. We're going to discuss the problems that cause the failures in the tile and stone world. Also, the design considerations that your team would have to look at in order to have successful projects. And something that you might not think we'll be talking about, we're going to talk about the substrate and the surface preparation, because that's a huge issue when it comes to having an actual correct installation. And waterproof membranes, there's probably over 1,000 different brands of waterproof type membranes. And again, remember, this is a waterproof membrane designed specifically for exterior balconies when you're using tile and stone. It's not any other products on top of it, but that's what we're going to be talking about. We're going to go over the types of membranes, and I guess everybody's ever heard of the ANSI requirements. The industry of flooring actually adheres to Tile Council of North America handbook as well as ANSI standards. So we have all of this in writing, and we'll go over a good bit of that. We're going to go over the different types and physical characteristics that these membranes actually have, and then discuss the proper installation for a waterproof membrane for exterior balconies. Now, these are the problems that actually cause failures. Era and workmanship. And I'm not picking on the contractors, but in general, there's probably 50,000 building products that the contractors have to keep up with. And it's very difficult to have knowledge in every single one of them. So era and workmanship probably points to the fact that they just don't have all the information they need to do that, whatever product they're using correctly. Now, choosing the wrong installation system is actually something that should never actually happen, but it does. There's, again, so many products out there that you got to be very careful. The standard we'll talk about in just a little bit actually brings it down into different categories of light residential to residential all the way up to heavy commercial. So that's one thing that a lot of contractors don't pay attention to. They might use an interior waterproofing product on an exterior balcony, and it certainly is not going to last through even a bad rainstorm, much less a hurricane. Now, the surfacing material is got not much to do with us, except for the fact that this particular presentation really is about tile and stone only. But choosing a correct material for the surface is actually very, very, very important. They have to be strong enough to withstand everything else that's going on: wind, rain, heat, everything. So we got to go over that. And then field and job site conditions, because I can teach you everything I know, but I have no clue what the job site looks like until I get there. And so field and job site conditions can sometimes make you make a change also and add an item that maybe you need to do to make sure that the surface is prepared correctly to accept tile install. And my favorite three initials, MVT, moisture vapor transmission. 20 years ago, we didn't even talk about this. But today, this by itself could easily be well over 50% of the failures in our industry, let's call it. So we're going to go over that. Now, damage due to water penetration can be quite substantial as far as financial repairs are concerned. And that's one of the biggest things that we have to deal with. But improper substrate preparation, you see that number 50%, are roughly, and I'm going to say it's greater than that by a substantial margin, they're roughly 50% of the beginning of a failure, maybe not the whole thing, but the beginning of a failure of a waterproofing project. Improper movement joint design. Now, what's a movement joint? Well, I rode my bicycle yesterday, so I'm not moving very good. My joints are hurting. That's not it. Improper movement joints are basically the gaps between the tiles that allow for the flooring to move and breathe as the heat and cold change the climate. They expand and contract. So not understanding that you have to have that designed into the flooring system can cause a failure also. But failure to specify and use properly the waterproof membrane that meets the requirement of whatever your job is, be it a bathroom or an exterior balcony, that's the biggest issue because it's quite a lengthy standard on the waterproofing side, especially on the flooring, from the flooring industry itself. And then in the last 10 to 15 years, this has come up where we have all of the factories have come up with the accessory items like edge conditions and things of that nature. So you have to make sure that you, as I say, button up the entire specification to have it all of the proper items in there. And that'll lead to a successful project. Now, I'm going to show you three little pictures. Just assume these are pieces of tile and you're looking at them cut through in section, let's call it. So we're concerned in our industry from the outward movement of that tile once it's been fixed or installed wherever it may be. We're concerned about that pressure. You would call that tensile, but it's just the outward stress. The big one is always inward because most buildings do move inward, we'll call them, at least the loading does move lateral. So the pushing inward of the piece of tile up against a piece of tile would be our biggest concern. We call that compression. And then last but not least, don't forget the applied loads. The floor is not just going to sit there. There's going to have stuff on top of it. Everything that adds to the surface loading condition would need to be properly specified. Post-tension pre-stressed concrete is, prevalent design criteria for building today, and it is designed to accept horizontal, vertical, and lateral movement. Now, that may not sound like a lot, but if you had let's say 10-inch by 7-foot long piece of tile, and there's quite a few of those, the planks are very popular today, and you were to put that in the wrong direction, let's say I would personally run it with the lower item, the beam that's the lower beam, I would run it straight down that grout joint. But if you decided to run it in the opposite direction, you'd have quite a lot of different variation in how much setting material you're going to have underneath that. So it's quite a challenge sometimes when you get to post-tension pre-stressed concrete, but it's out there and you just need to know how to consider designing for it. Thermal changes, exterior projects. It's always a nice warm thing we have going on here in the state of Florida. And the Florida Solar Energy Commission, back many moons ago, had surface registered temperatures. And for some reason, they like to do these tests in West Palm Beach. So they picked on an outside floor of quarry tile in West Palm Beach, and the surface temperature reached 147 degrees. So what happens when God decides every afternoon to water the plants and feed the alligators with some water? Well, that temperature differential can drop as much as 70 degrees in a short period of time. Now, the concrete guide says anything above a 50-degree temperature change quickly can force concrete to expand or contract, let's say, be in the other opposite direction where it got cold, as much as 1/4 of an inch every 10 feet. So you got to take into consideration excessive movement when you're dealing with an exterior project. And again, especially when you're using tile and stone, which is what we're talking about. So why do floors fail? Well, that's another hour talk, and we're not going to get into that one. But 85% of all the failures in our industry, based on the statistics that they give us every year, are due to improper surface preparation. Some aspect of that, wasn't done right. Either specified the wrong product and or the contractor just flat didn't do it correctly. So that is a huge number. So this getting the preparation of the surface prepared for whatever you're going to put on top of it is actually more important than the product you're putting down. Now, in our industry, of course, we have all of our things adhered to the ANSI standards. So in our guidebook, let's say, a proper substrate must be sound and conform to all building code requirements. Now, that's a mouthful. What does that actually mean? Well, this project you're looking at right here, a gentleman actually did install tile and stone directly on top of it. He had in different areas. And they just literally took a setting material and popped it directly down. And it didn't take 2 to 3 months of once the building got prepared and the floors were being walked on, it took about 2 to 3 months for it to actually cause a failure. But this is a no-no. This is every aspect pretty much in one picture. You can see how wide the form joints were. Look at the cracking in the floor itself. I mean, this is just what you call flat ugly. So that's something we have to make sure that we design properly so that that doesn't have any issues. And of course, thermal and structural movement are in every building. So we have to consider that. And if you don't know what the movement joint is in our industry, then you're going to know before I'm finished here today. Because the movement joint is what allows for all the movement and the release of pressure to keep the floor tiles placed where you put them. Now, the one on the left-hand side, the picture you can see, it's a nice expansion joint right there in the concrete. Now, this was on the left-hand side of that joint, they added that floor after the fact of the one that was on the right-hand side. So they just literally had 2 different pours, and actually the left side is sloped downward as the cars come up and down there. They park them outside. So you can see they just set the tile directly over the top of a rather large and wide expansion joint. And it didn't take very long for them to break those tiles. That's a heck of a lot of pressure in the tiles. And that's porcelain tile. It is very difficult to do that. So it literally broke the tiles. Now on the right-hand side, that's one of my favorite. This guy actually did put movement joints in the floor, but I guess they took a coke break or something right when they got there to the middle. And you're an interior designer, don't you just love that ugly brown joint they stuck right at about 1/3 of the tile, just cut right through it? So they did their job. They put joints in there. They just didn't do it correctly. There's an easier way to do that. You don't have to line it up directly over the crack, which is really literally physically impossible to do anyway most of the time. Now, this is a tile set directly over expansion joint. I took this picture many, many, many years ago. As you can see, that's 6x6 quarry tile. And you can see how it cracked right on the left-hand side of the joint, and then kind of went over to the right-hand side of the joint. And the reason that is so unusual is that this is actually epoxy grout, which is very difficult to even break with a hammer when you get finished, when it cures. So this was a 1-story barbecue place where they just literally came in the kitchen and plopped quarry tile down with a setting material and then grouted right over it and left. And this is what happens when you don't pay attention to, the movement joints, and also allow for there to be a separation between the bad floor and the setting material that you're installing. Now, this is a very unique project here. This is a project that was up in Michigan. It was the original owner of the Orlando Magic, and he actually built a house down in Key West, I believe it is, when he bought the Magic, and put a beautiful shelf stone floor around his pool. Well, this is actually up in Michigan, where they decided to take that same shelf stone up to Michigan and actually put it around another pool area, and it didn't make it through one freeze thaw change. It didn't make it through one before that highly porous product just began to crumble and pop. So the weather conditions are also something that's very important that you consider when you're looking at exterior projects. Everything has to be like the max Q, the tile, the grout, the setting material, the movement joints. They all have to be extremely strong and flexible products. So if there's any questions, I guess I can see them pop up later, but we'll keep going. Now, what is the largest liability that any building owner or design professional has in the world of construction? I think you can probably guess what I'm going to say. Weatherproofing and waterproofing. Those failures are actually one of the largest issues that you will have. And unfortunately, the world of construction gives us a lot of challenges. I don't care if it's a bathroom or a 50-story building, you're going to have challenges every step of the way. Here's a cute quote from an architect, former architect that I like. It says, "In pure architecture, the smallest detail should have a meaning and serve a purpose." And that's actually my job, is the details and the specifications. I don't ever get a phone call that says, "Geez, thank you, you did a great job." It's always, "Why did this break?" So the details and the specifications are the key to success, especially in the flooring industry, because you're actually banging something and beating something on top of it. So it's got constant activity. So the specification is incredibly important. And here's another quote. "At some point, form must be married to function with a proper detail. Specifications for proper products required based on the project application needs," that specific project, not the one down the street, "and then built or installed properly." Now, who made that quote? I did. Because basically that's my job, is to assist in making sure that we get all this information done. So waterproofing is one of the biggest issues that everybody has in every building, and always will be. And some of the issues we just can't control, such as the concrete itself. Concrete is made of cement, supplementary materials, aggregate, and then my favorite enemy, Mr. Water. That water is the biggest issue that we always have. Concrete moisture sources, the water of hydration, we have the water of convenience, and then we have moisture vapor transmission. And that's one of the biggest issues we have in the flooring industry, because once the concrete is cured and or possibly even still being cured, it is still going to have moisture vapor transmission coming through. And if you just simply were to install a stone over a piece of concrete that was still emitting its moisture vapor transmission, you're going to have a lot of problem with the additional moisture going into the setting material itself, which needs to properly cure at its own pace. So all of these products I'm about to show you can fail. I'm not going to say they will, but they can fail if moisture vapor transmission is too much. This one is probably the number one at the top of the list that will fail if moisture vapor transmission is too much. That is what we call VCT, then LVT. I'm sure everybody knows what luxury vinyl tile is today. Laminates, I'm sure you know what that product is. Any type of hardwood, engineered, solid, strand woven, those all are massively affected by too much moisture. Rubber flooring for sure. Obviously it would be too. Carpet. And then tile and stone and glass are all down at the bottom because most tiles today are not porous. Now stone can be, and glass certainly is not. So really the moisture vapor transmission that would affect them would be going through the grout joints, et cetera, and then possibly delaminating the setting material right at the surface of those materials, upside down surface actually. So these are our biggest problems in the world of moisture vapor transmission. In concrete surfacing and refinishing, which is really not much to do with tile and stone, but that also is involved in moisture vapor transmission. Now we test them in many different ways. They're all tested by some specific type of device. The moisture vapor testing for predominant testing for concrete, at least it was for the longest time. I think it's fading and we're getting into new and different ways to do it. But calcium chloride test, which as you can see, it takes 3 tests, 1,000 square feet per, and then an additional 1,000 square feet, and then 72 hours to complete the test. And then most flooring manufacturers, and I'm just going to throw them all out there, require a maximum of 4 pounds per 1,000 in a 24-hour period as far as the moisture vapor transmission. Anything beyond that is going to damage either the setting material or something else in the system itself. Now, that's a pretty low number. I'd say probably the average moisture vapor transmission in the building that I'm sitting in right now, 4-story, 5-story building, I'm going to guess is probably 8%. I'm a couple of 100 yards from some water, so I'm getting moisture from all directions, but the manufacturers want all of this to be below 4 pounds per 1,000 before you install a surfacing material over it. And that's the biggest challenge that we have, especially in Florida. The RH testing I've noticed has become very popular these days, and I like it better. It's much better test. And you just drill a hole in the floor, put this little diode down in there, and it gives you the relative humidity of the concrete slab. And unfortunately, once again, the manufacturers in our world all require a minimum of 75, I mean, a maximum of 75% relative humidity. Anything above that is probably going to damage whatever you're installing. And then last but not least, you do have what we call the moisture test, which is kind of like you would do in a swimming pool. This is really more for a pH problem, anything that would be high alkaline, let's say. And the flooring manufacturers won't warrant any product with a pH higher than 9. And that's simply because that pH would deteriorate the setting material and the glues pretty substantially. So those are 3 items that we always have to look at whenever we're preparing our specifications to make sure we're doing it correctly. All right, waterproofing. That's what we're going to be talking about. By the way, this is the Olympics in Atlanta, and that is the actual swimming pool at Georgia Tech, my alma mater, which was installed. But if you remember back to that Olympics, you never saw any Olympic swimming done in that pool. That's because before the Olympics were started, that pool cracked. It cracked, and literally they couldn't use it, which is why they had to take everybody over to Athens to their swimming pool, which, would have been the smartest thing to do in the first place, but they didn't. So waterproofing can cause trouble in just about any area you want. What types of materials require waterproofing? Swimming pools, water parks, spas, fountains, whirlpool tubs, hydrotherapy pools. This is a whopper, showers and steam rooms. And if you don't follow the ANSI standard to the letter of the law in a steam room, you'll see how fast that steam goes through the wall. It penetrates and destroys everything on the outside too. Commercial kitchens, absolutely, from a sanitary standpoint. Building facades, roof decks, and this is my favorite, exterior plazas and balconies, which we'll be talking about the rest of this class. And if I ever see the proper slope put on an exterior balcony in the state of Florida, the proper slope, I'm gonna retire right there because it just never happens. Now, 90% of the waterproofing problems are involved in just a very small percentage of the area. However, 70% of the design professional liability, I got that from the insurance class at the AIA convention about every 3 or 4 years. I'll go in there and see what the statistic is, and it pretty much is the same. So it's a tremendous part of the liability that design professionals actually have to deal with. And we do have a standard, and this is all you have to remember. I don't like acronyms, but ANSI 118.10. That is the test that we use to determine whether setting materials and underlayments are of the proper strength to be used underneath water, or even in wet applications, let's say. So having a proper specification is the key. Now, the standard is pretty rough. It's a mean little rascal. Waterproofing, we have different levels: waterproofing, water resistant, damp proof, and then vapor barriers, because all of these exist in our world. The red one, the waterproof, at the top of the list, that's the one that we use for exterior, obviously, and it's the maximum hydrostatic pressure release. So that's the one we'll be dealing with when you're looking at our standard. It is called ANSI 118.10. And if a factory, even if it's not mine, actually says that it passed ANSI 118.10, you can be rest assured that it went through this regime of testing, which is pretty incredible. 7 days dry and wet immersion, 28-day dry, 100 days underwater, and then it's tested with certain physical bond strengths. So if you do see that it doesn't have ANSI 118.10, I would not put it and immerse it in underwater. Now, IAMPO, the plumbing industry, also has their rules and regulations, and of course you have to look at each local code and state codes. Even over in Orlando, even on Disney projects, sometimes they actually add something to the specification that they need. So it's more than one item, so it can come from all different areas, multiple codes, and you can use proper specifications that come from all of those to make a good specification for waterproofing projects. Now, there's 3 components to a successful waterproofing project. Absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, proper slope or pitch. I get in more arguments with this every day of my life. Someone calls me and says, I'm going to do this. I'm going to take the tile off the balcony and I'm going to put more down. My first question is, what is the slope you have? They go, well, it's about 1/8 of an inch. Can they use my product? My answer is no, you can't. It's got to be 1/4 inch per foot, and that's what the code says. I'm not making that up, but you have to then add something to get the slope and or pitch proper. You have to create a waterproof surface, otherwise it's going to absorb right down into it. And last but not least, you have to get the water out of the system. You've got to get it with drainage. Other than that, you're going to have an issue down the road no matter what. So you have to create a pan effect. You need a little L up the walls. You can't just go flat to the walls and expect for some sort of a liquid joint to hold the water out with the expansion and contraction that goes on in exterior projects. You can't do that. So you have to create an L effect with at least 1/4 inch per foot slope away from, let's call it the sliders, the doors, on this particular picture. So it's very simple. And the highest level of moisture problems that we have are usually in the interiors such as the bathrooms themselves. Now, this is a picture. It's an old picture. This is the way we used to do it a long time ago, with a pan, and you fill it up full of mud and then just slope the tiles to get the water out away from the wall. But this does not work with the plumbing code, simply because, as you can see where the weep hole is, the water goes into the pan, fills all the way up to the top. Then the simple water actually will flow out through the weep hole, but what's underneath the level of the weep hole, the water just stays there. And that's where you get the ugly smells and the ugly black stuff coming up through the tiles that are in the shower pan. This will meet the code. Notice the entire area is sloped. There's nowhere for the water to actually get stopped, and it will flow right out through the weep hole. So creating the proper slope and getting the water out are the two biggest issues. There's a project not too far from where I live. It was down in Bradenton, and it's a firehouse, and the guys were getting sick all the time. I guess blue flu is the police. I think red flu is the firefighters. So they were getting sick all the time, and nobody could figure out why. Well, they didn't take but one look at this floor to determine that that black stuff was actually mold. So when we took up one piece of tile, you can see how much water was in there. The actual slope didn't work at all. The pan was shot, and so water was constantly underneath this floor. And this is where they shower probably 5, 6 times a day. So they literally had to tear the entire thing out and start all over again. But that's kind of an issue. That's what happens when it comes to showers. And this isn't a shower that's in a, this is just a regular residential shower. And as you can see, moisture and water was just getting stuck in certain places. And literally you can see how bad the moisture and the water will just destroy anything. I mean, it'll actually destroy the metal in this particular application. And you can see a little closer view of that. You can see over here on the right hand side where there's some actual metal trims, and they're rusted completely. And of course, if you're dealing with a shower and there's a floor underneath it, and you're holding water and it's leaking out one side, it'll literally go straight down through the floor and create another issue in some other place, such as the ceiling of the person underneath you. Now, this is a typical shower pan failure. And you can see that that is black mold, which is highly dangerous and something you really don't want to mess with. But it happens a lot in residential showers. So, and I'm sure you've seen this before. Look at all the change in elevations. Look where all the mold is. So what do? Well, there's only one thing you can do, and you have to call the world's most famous contractor, and that is jackhammer. Because this is that same floor. You can see how much mold was in it all the way up to and went all the way up the walls themselves. So it gets rather ugly. So mold and moisture mitigation is a humongous part of our business. And an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And a very famous fellow said that one. So getting the specification for your specific application correctly is paramount. And making sure all products in a floor, tile, and stone meet ANSI 118.10 and your specification and details are done correctly. So that'll bring you up to where we're going to look at some projects real quick. Now, our industry does adhere to 2 Bibles, and one's the Tile Council of North America, and then the other one is the ANSI Standard, which is probably 3 different books. And the ANSI Standard itself takes care of, that'll be the pictures on the right. You can see that came right out of our ANSI Standard book. No, excuse me, I'm sorry. That's the Tile Council handbook there, because it has the details in it. Now there's probably, as far as showers are concerned, there's probably 40 details just like that. And they're usually 2 to 3 pages long. This particular one, you can see on the left-hand side, it's for solid back wall, concrete substrate, bonded waterproof membrane, and ceramic tile. So you'll notice down the words recommended usages, environmental exposure classification. There's probably 2 more pages on this one item, and it gives you everything you need to know for your specification. Every item is quite extensive. It'll tell you everything you need to put in there. These books are available from most factories. If you really would like to have a Tile Council handbook, please shoot me an email after this class and I'll make certain you get one, because this is a lifesaver. It saves my life, we'll put it that way. But it goes over everything. It's been 70 years in the making. Plus we have new products and new details to go in there. There's actual full size pieces of items such as your shower seats now in our industry. So we have added a lot more detail with pictures and everything you need to know about how it sets and how to fix the failures, etc. You can see edge details here. We got mortar curb, preform curb, solid curb, and then alternating receptor base. It's just, the book is about almost 2 inches, 2.5 inches thick. And it goes through all of this stuff. And I mentioned steam showers earlier. If you don't put this steam shower specification together correctly, and notice at the wall, the bottom and the top, the actual sealed slip joints, and then you would literally see how fast that moisture and steam will go through that wall and damage things on the other side of that wall. But that is the detail that you really need to remain in all your specifications when you're dealing with a steam shower itself. Now, let's look at an exterior balcony, just for the heck of it. Oh, next comes my favorite notes. Now, I do this class all over the country, but in Florida, I have to add this note because of the state of Florida building code. And so I just need to tell you this. All tile and stone installations on exterior balconies or decks in the state of Florida must use a waterproof membrane that passes the state of Florida building code waterproofing criteria. Now, Texas and California, I do believe, are similar. They do have something. I don't go to all states, so I can't say that all states actually have this, but Florida certainly does. You have to, if you're going to use it on exterior balconies and decks in the state of Florida, and you're going to install tile or stone, now make sure you hear what I'm saying. If you're going to put a cementitious top coat over it, that's not what we're talking about. This is for tile and stone installations. Then you need to have a product that actually passes that test. And a caveat, if you're in Miami-Dade County, then you need a notice of acceptance of that particular item, the actual test. So it's two things. You have to have the exterior balcony waterproof membrane from the factory tested, and it gets a building number. It gets one of those numbers. And then next, you would have to submit that product. We do, you don't. And we submit that product to Miami-Dade County, and they give us what is called an NOA. And that's pretty much used only in the waterproofing world.
Hey, Jim.
Yes.
I want to just real quick give you a heads up. You've got a couple questions, and they're asking about this. What about stylish shower linear drain details? And then the next question was, is there a digital version of the tile handbook?
There's the tile handbook is one big thick book. The ANSI standards, which talk about how the material is set and gives all the standards for settings, and specific, I mean, really like epoxy grouts and all that stuff. Those are in different books too, but they're only really available through us. So if someone wants one or needs one, you could go to the Tile Council yourself and order it if you'd like. But I wouldn't do that. My recommendation would be that we get you. They have what do you call it? It's a software that literally you go in and you buy it, and then it emails it to you, and then you download it later, and it's all PDF files. It's everything is already done for you. You don't have to cut a page out just to run a copy of a test. So it gives you all that information. Well, we can get it. Most factories will offer that, and we can do it, but you can get that also. Now, what was the other question? You had two questions.
Yeah, they were asking about stylish shower linear drain details.
Yeah, they're in the book, and it's probably, I'm gonna say, you saw a couple of them in one of the pictures I did. I just threw one of those up there, but yeah, linear drains, they probably have 5 or 6 different sections where linear drains are done. It tells you everything. It tells you how to install them, you know, what the slope needs to be, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the manufacturers all obviously have their own detail and their own criteria. So you'd want to match the Tile Council, which is totally generic, to the factory that you're looking at, and then compare the two, and then just use our installation criteria for theirs, because they're going to just repeat what I just said. They're going to put our stuff in their drain literature.
All right, you're caught up.
All right, perfect. So this is an exterior balcony and actually in the state of California. And as you can see, let me flip back one page, 2 pages. It shows you, okay, this is, like a apartment complex, and they're going to install tile on the exterior of a apartment complex. So you can see this is a wood floor joist system. So we deal with wood floor joist systems and concrete, but this is definitely a wood floor joist system that we're installing on these pictures here. So you can see the surface board material, which is some sort of a backer board. Underneath that would be 3/4 inch exterior grade plywood. And the standard requires another at least 1/2 inch of another board. You could use any of the boards, and there's probably over 100 boards in our ANSI standard and Tile Council handbook now. They don't call them by trade name. They obviously call them cementitious backer board or something glued backer board. So that's what they would look like. Now, this particular project, the slope was obviously already done. You have a 1/4 inch per foot slope from the right side of this gentleman all the way over to the left, leaning outward. And this is a rolled goods sheet membrane. So they're basically all they're doing right now is laying out the area so they can cut these pieces. And that's what we recommend. Doing them one at a time is a pain. So we recommend that they be laid out intelligently and then moved out of the way and then installed, one at a time after that. So he's laying it out and cutting the sheets for that specific area. And then once they've cut all of those, they'll obviously move them out of the way. And there's going to be an exterior grade primer that would need to be go over the surface of the material. And again, this is some sort of a cementitious board that we're going over the top of. Now they're all different colors. Some of them are black, some of them are blue. This particular product made by the company that I work with, this product is water-based. It's not solvent-based. We do make one, but we don't really recommend it anymore. We prefer that the water-based product be used. That's why you can actually see the screw joints on the floor. So you basically you put 2 coats of this, really would be all you'd need, over the top of it, and you let it dry. Probably it dries in less than, let's say, an hour. It'll still be slightly tacky to walk on, where if you were to use some other products which are really thick, they're gonna take a very long time to dry. And solvents dry pretty fast too, but we're not a fan of solvents. So this primer would be ready in about an hour, let's say. It's done. It'd have a slight tack on it. You could literally feel your feet touching the surface. However, if you walked on it right away, 1 minute after you put this down, your shoes would get stuck to the floor because it'll just hold them there. So you do definitely let it dry for about an hour, and then it's just slightly tacky. They had already cut all of this area, and they've already primed all of the area. And now they're bringing back one of the rolls, and they're going to peel the release paper off. This is one side sticky, not 2 sides sticky. So they're going to pull the sheet, the white paper off. And this, you can see that on that man's foot right there, the black. All of the products that we manufacture are made out of asphalt. We make our own product. We actually take asphalt, melt it down, and roll it. And it's got fiber and mesh rolled into it. So that's what that product is. It's made specifically for waterproofing. So he's removing the release paper, and it's about 36 inches wide. So this particular floor was, you can see you use 2 rolls, the full length. And as you can see in the middle there, you can see black. Well, that's because at the end of one side of this roll, there's 3 inches of raw material. There's that surface coating that you see, that fiber is left off the edge of each roll by it's 4 inches actually. So that's where you overlap the 2. So there's always an overlap in the waterproofing world. It depends on where you are. It's 3 or 4 inches. So we've overlapped the floor, and they've laid down their pre-cut pieces. Now they've laid it flat, but we now have to go around the perimeter of the whole thing and start working there. So the product that actually is approved by the state of Florida has 4 components. The sheet good is one. The primer is another. And then there's a roll of fabric, just like drywall fabric, but it's not. You can see him cutting it, 7.5 inches long. And then there is another membrane. It's a liquid membrane. And this is for the corners. And this is required by the Florida Building Code. We didn't make this one up. They required this. So we're pushing the edge. You can see you put a coat down and you press the fabric into that. And once you've got that in there, then you put another coat on top of it. And basically when you're done, you can see it look like this. Then when you're finished, let's say these bottom 2, 3 steps, you'll notice there's a blue stripe above the word liquid waterproof membrane and below it. Well, we do use the same liquid after you're finished to come back and put one more coat over the seam, just as a safety factor. And again, that came from the actual building code test itself. So that's really what it would look like when you get finished. It's just so much easier to use a liquid on the corners. If you tried to bend that material and do it right, you'd have a gap up against the wall, which would be, you know, an ant farm or air gap. And it's just not something that you want on an exterior balcony in Florida. You really don't. I'm going to say that around 70% of exterior projects in the state of Florida have some sort of a failure because somebody doesn't do it right. They don't, as I say, seam it up properly. So now we've done all the corners. Notice we've gone over here to the edges and we've built it up a couple of inches on the edges too. Now the tile's not going to go 4 inches up the wall. So we've really got the waterproofing laid down, and it's not that hard of a thing to do, but you are using a liquid membrane and you are using a fabric for the base floor that is pretty sticky on the back. You definitely don't want to be getting your hand stuck on it. And then you come back in and you install your tile directly over the top of it. And you've got yourself a waterproof application. Now notice there's a proper slope to this. The camera picture is not that great, but you do have a 1/4 of an inch per foot slope from the far left side all the way over to the right. And that's what you have to have on any waterproofing. It doesn't make any difference what it is. Now, if you're going to do just a pool deck area, that's a horse of a different color. You got a lot more stuff to be dealing with when you're dealing with a pool deck, exterior pool decking area. Now, as you can see, these guys look to the right-hand side where the broom is. These guys are actually rolling out the fabric. And notice on the right-hand side, that's the edge that I mentioned was 3 inches with just nothing on it. And that's you would pull the next roll adjacent to it over and overlap it onto that. They're doing it over here on the left-hand side, and they're overlapping over to the left-hand side, the side where the gentleman with the black shirt is. So that's how you basically roll it out. It's not that hard, but you do need 3 or 4 people to do it. And then once you get all of the material laid out, obviously we got to determine in a pool deck area such as this, how do you get the water out of the system? This is a Denver, Colorado application. So you're going to have a lot of, snow and rain and stuff. So this actually has 2 slopes, believe it or not, from the blue tarp over to the right-hand side, going all the way to over where the gutter is. It's a pretty substantial slope downward. And then once you get on the other side, it actually goes flat and then starts to slope back up, pushing the water into another drain, which you can't see. So it's very important to design this to get the water out of the system so you don't have to deal with it. And in this instance, solvent-based primer was the best product to use. It really was. And so that's why you see the blackness. This is the other product, which is a solvent-based product. And they coated it completely over, and then you set the material directly on top of this. And we do require the overlap. It was required again by the Florida Building Code, but again, this was done in Colorado, but the Florida Building Code does require that overlap. And you're going to use a secondary waterproof membrane even in this type of an application, especially since they're going to have lights. So you're going to be using some sort of a tube caulking, which will be, just for the cover. And once you've done that, you pretty much can go ahead and set your tile and build the pool, and you're ready to go. You've done your job. So from the smallest pool application you can possibly find to the biggest one I've ever seen, if you look in the upper left-hand corner, You can see a person standing there in a black outfit. That's actually me standing there. That's how big this swimming pool was. It was a monster. It was definitely a big pool. So the biggest thing I've ever seen. Waterproofing can create all kinds of beautiful, unique applications, but you got to do it right. And if you fell asleep in my presentation, this is what your project's going to look like next time. So make sure you obey the rules and do it right, and you'll have a successful exterior balcony tile and stone application. Any questions?
Hey, Jim, I do not see any currently, but let's give them a minute or two in case they want to
Okay.
type one in. I think we still have technically, we have about 10 minutes left if anybody wants to chat. And then we'll start the next presentation at 3:30, but you guys let us know. Everybody's saying thank you.
Don't forget, if anyone really would like to get copies of the Tile Council Handbook, my email address is right there. I live in Florida, so even if you're not from Florida, we can still get one to you.
Here's one. It asks thoughts on liquid versus membrane waterproofing.
Okay, liquids are, as I mentioned toward the end of that presentation, liquids are great when you need them in certain applications. Now, in an interior application, there's no reason to use a sheet membrane. As a matter of fact, that would be a pain in the tail having to do it up a wall. Those sheet membranes are not easy. So liquids can have an advantage, in small applications as well as interior applications. This is an exterior balcony class. The liquid that we used on the last pictures in this presentation, that's a membrane that can be used interior for your showers, or even in condominium, let's say, in the bathroom where you're putting down a sound membrane, which is the next class, by the way, and you want to waterproof it. You just coat over the top of that. So liquids are very good and they work very well. However, you got to make sure you get the right amount of liquid, whatever factory is, the thickness down. And then that's usually gauged with that fabric roll that goes into it. That's how they do it.
All right.
And
Donna's asking about what about spray on waterproofing?
we don't have any spray down waterproof membrane in the world that would pass the Florida Building Code test. Just wouldn't happen. Now, again, remember, this is for tile and stone applications. Let's say you decide not to use tile and stone and you're just going to use a 2-inch cementitious top coat over the top of whatever waterproof membrane you have gotten tested by Florida and approved. Yeah, you could use a liquid spray down waterproofing over the top of that. But if you're going to install tile or stone, that would actually be a bond breaker for your setting material. Did that make any sense?
Did to me.
Okay. Okay, good. Good.
I do, yeah. So I just so you know that we do have some of our attendees are Florida architects, but they don't necessarily live in Florida.
Well, that's
So
fine. Yeah.
yeah, some of them might actually, in some of their projects, obviously, if they're doing anything in Florida, they would have to comply to the Florida Building Code, but outside of Florida, not so much.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, again, I know California, I know Texas. I can't guarantee you New York, but I heard somebody say it was. I think the biggest cities in the country, like Los Angeles, I think in those massive cities, they've all followed suit on the exterior balcony thing. Because you remember, California had a horrible balcony failure up in the northwest area of a college where water infiltrated the system, the wood rotted, and some children, the balcony fell. So I know California was probably the first to do it. They were the first to do it, and I think we followed suit Florida shortly thereafter. I can't guarantee it has spread throughout the country, so I don't know that. But there's no law that says you can't build better than the building code, by the way.
Okay. I don't see any more questions coming in, but obviously you all have his contact information and can reach out. And he's going to be back with us at 3:30 for our final presentation. So everybody just hang out. Oh gosh. And we have another question. For reconstruction of an existing balcony, how much would you recommend to remove and down to the underlayment or structural member?
It's always best in an exterior application to take it down to the concrete slab that was originally there. You're just gonna run into trouble. You know, it's difficult to pull waterproof membranes off the concrete itself. So you're gonna be scrubbing down all the way to bare concrete anyway. And never, for any reason, put waterproofing over top of another waterproofing. Don't even think about it. It will fail very quickly. There's way too much material there and way too much excessive movement, and moisture and water will encapsulate in between the two, and it'll just be a disaster. So you got to go all the way down to the original substrate, make certain you get the proper slope, and then set the material on top of it. Now you can tear tile off of a floor, not damage it, not damage the membrane, and maybe reinstall. You might be able to pull that off. Actually, sometimes tiles just fall and come right off.